Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Freeston, Director of Quality Improvement at the Early Years Alliance, and I am joined for this afternoon's session by Melanie Pilcher, Quality and Standards Manager with me at the Alliance.
Hello, everybody.
Hopefully you can see my screen, which gives you the title of today's session, Welcome Back, Meet the Needs of Children from Day One. Hopefully, if you've been with us throughout this series of sessions which have been focused on how we welcome children back into our provision since mid-March, whenever it was, when we were generally closed down. We have tried to focus on the practical implications that we will face as a sector as we start to open up our provision from the 1st of June, when work will be available to allow us to welcome children back and welcome their parents as well. The focus of today's session is what you will do with the children as they return after 10 weeks away, at least 10 weeks away. And I appreciate that for many settings, they'll be making the decision that they won't go back until much later in the summer, maybe even September. So hopefully this session will give some early thinking to how you may approach that process. But obviously, as many settings are looking to open in the week commencing from next Monday, we felt it timely to try and present these sessions as quickly as we could. We are obviously conscious that there are a whole range of issues and factors that you'll be considering if you're looking to open up your provision for the first time in 10 weeks. They could be financial, there'll be staffing issues, about the environment, etc. We will not be focusing on those in today's session, but hopefully if you've been with us on this journey, you'll be aware that the Alliance's website has become an essential resource to keep visiting for frequently asked questions and for up-to-date guidance on a whole host of topics. And Melanie, later through today's presentation, will give an indication of the resources that we've also made available. What we will try and do today is look at the joyous situation of welcoming children back into our settings. I will give a brief overview of the guidance which has just been published and the range of guidance which is available for your consideration. But the main content of today's session, I will hand over to Melanie to walk us through. And at that point, I'd be more than happy to receive your questions in, because I become the panel chair in some ways to actually try and address as many of those as we can within the time available. I apologise in advance if I don't get to your specific question. What I try and do in these events is to have a series of themes from trying to group together the questions that are coming in. So if I don't address yours specifically, I apologise, and we hope that the general approach of your question does get covered more generally. If it's something to which we don't know the answer at all and is material, then we will undertake to take your contact details and try and address and get back to you specifically. But again, hopefully most of the general issues can be addressed. Okay, so without further ado, hopefully my screen is still working. The aims of today's session, I need to get the questions out of the way. To keep the personal, social and emotional development of children at the heart of the provision as we reopen. So much of the focus has been around the staffing sides, the financial side. It's been valuable and essential for us to think about what's in the best interest of the children, and everything we do, it should be around their safety, their well-being, their learning and development. To identify some of the key considerations for meeting the unique child's needs by building information that you can gather prior to their return, sharing ideas and resources to support their settling back in many situations, and to build on the home learning environment experience, whether that's good or ill, that they will have had over the last 10 weeks, to further engage parents as we move forward. Many people ask if we can show you who is speaking. This is a picture of Melanie, and that is me. And the guidance that has come this week, published on Sunday, was the up-to-date planning guidance for early years and childcare settings. That joins a whole list of publications from DFE, considering the issues that face the education sector as a whole, for those that provision that has either stayed open over the 10 years for vulnerable children or the children of essential workers, and also in the preparation for coming back to the wider provision for children of all ages. You'll be pleased to know I don't intend to go through them all here. You'll see that these are hyperlinks, and we will share these slides to everybody who has registered for today's session. And the links do work. If you press control and click on each of them, it takes you directly to the government's website in the appropriate section. So those will be circulated tomorrow, hopefully, certainly by the early part of next week. I will only dwell on a couple of key issues of the points published on the 24th of May guidance last Sunday. And I think this is the key one. In the preamble, it says, every setting is different, and it is not a requirement to use all or parts of this toolkit. Settings may use their professional judgment and choose to follow alternative approaches depending on their particular circumstances, but at all times will need to take account of relevant public health guidance to maximise safety for those in the environment. So really what is being said here is it's a recognition of the professionalism that we have as a sector and the wholly inappropriate and impossible approach that could be taken of saying you must meet these various criteria before you open. It's a recognition on the part of government that all provision differs, each has its unique circumstances, and so in effect we have to give consideration to what is important to us, to our children, in order to make those vital decisions about when we reopen and what provision looks like when we do. The contents is then listed. Again, these hyperlinks work when you receive the slides, and you'll be pleased to know, intend to go through them all. It covers all the areas that you would expect. And I think it's correct to say, Melanie, that actually we're really pleased on reviewing these because much of the content reflects very closely what we have been saying in these and similar sessions throughout this period.
Yes, Michael, that's completely right. It was really heartening to see as well.
Thank you. The one point I will take you through, because I think it's taken from point 4, agree a protocol for responding to a suspected case of coronavirus and ensuring the setting is prepared, because we anticipated that this will be one focus of many of the questions for today. And I thought it would be helpful if we just spent a couple of minutes giving consideration to what the guidance says on this. All staff and children who are attending a childcare setting will have access to a test if they display symptoms of coronavirus. And this, remember, has been added to by the Health Secretary's announcement yesterday, I think it was, which will be Wednesday, that all children under 5 can also now be tested. So that wasn't the case previously, but there has been confirmation that all children, no matter what age, can now be tested. So where the child or staff member tests negative, they can return to their setting and the fellow household members can end their self-isolation. If the child or staff member tests positive, the rest of their immediate group within their setting should be sent home and advised to self-isolate for 14 days. Now, Melanie will speak more as we go through today's discussion about what is meant by immediate group. But do you want to spend just a minute or two, Melanie, explaining briefly what's meant by that?
Yes, what it means is actually the cohort group. So as we know, we've been advised to keep children with a consistent member of staff and to keep them in what's sometimes referred to as bubbles. I'm not going to refer to them as that, but cohort or group of children. So basically what that means is that you're thinking about those children in that group, and you need to also, just to make the point, update your procedure or have a procedure in place, a written procedure in place for how you're going to manage this.
Thank you. And the second point, which relates to this, is important as well. And this, again, we got more information of this from the Health Secretary on Wednesday. The National Test and Trace programme is now underway from today, Thursday. And so if other cases are detected within the setting, Public Health England's local health protection teams will conduct a rapid investigation and will advise settings on the most appropriate action to take. In some cases, a larger group may be asked to self-isolate at home as a precautionary measure. excuse me, where settings are observing guidance on infection prevention and control, which will reduce risk of transmission, closure of the whole setting will not generally be necessary. And I think this is an interesting point. The momentum seems to be towards more it's open and unless it isn't, rather than, if that makes sense, rather than it being the assumption that the provision will not be open. And I suppose, Melanie, the issue is in terms of settings being confident of having their infection prevention and control procedures in place even before COVID came along, in terms of reviewing how they would have responded to any other infections such as scarlet fever or anything like that.
Yes, definitely. Those basic procedures that we've all been working to for a long time now apply. And I think what we're looking at here is if we're looking at an outbreak where there's more than one or maybe two confirmed cases, then I think that's where Public Health England would probably step in and take further action.
Okay, thank you. Melanie, with that, I will hand over to you, please, and then that will allow me, hopefully, to start managing the questions that are coming through. Thank you.
Of course, Michael. I'll just let you know when I want you to move the slides on, but that's brilliant.
Oh dear, multitasking. Okay.
Multitasking, yes. Thank you. Okay, so before we start, what I would like to say is that a lot of what I'm going to talk about relates to the third pack in our Welcome Back series that I know a lot of you have actually accessed, because it's free of charge to any of you that are members, and we've had some excellent feedback about how useful you're finding these packs. So what I wanted to do really was just highlight some of the key things, and if you want to know more, please go to our shop online and download your free pack. So let's start then by, as Michael said earlier, everything that I wanted to talk about now is about putting the needs of the child first, because actually when we're making some of these difficult decisions as we prepare to return, by actually putting the needs of the child first, some of those decisions become easier to make. Not all of them, but some of them. So some of the key things that we are thinking about now is how do we group those cohorts of children? So really this relies on what the government says. So for example, keeping the group sizes to a maximum of 8 children is preferable. So groups are as small as possible. This is what the guidance says. Providers are expected to ensure that there are no more than 16 children in a group in an early years setting. So obviously you're probably looking at having a maximum of 2 groups of 8. Some settings are saying that they're going to divide that up and make those smaller groups. Again, it depends on the staff available and how you organise your setting. Then we have to think very carefully about what does social distancing look like in an early years setting and how do we manage it. And as soon as the DfE acknowledged that actually social distancing in an early years context is going to be nigh on impossible, then again, we can start to see some of the things that we can and we cannot achieve. And I looked at some of the images of things that are happening in other countries where I've seen awful images of children sat in playgrounds with a box chalked around them, a 2-metre distance between them, and it was probably one of the saddest things I've ever seen. And I think that the key message for me here is that this relies on our infection control practices. This is where we make up for the fact that we cannot possibly social distance young children. It is play and the need to communicate and interact with their peers is innate to a young child. And actually trying to stop or suppress that, I think, is tantamount to emotional abuse. So again, in the pack, I talk about that in more detail. I'm not going to keep referring back to the pack. In a way, I want to leave you wanting more because that should drive you to our website. We have to think about what activities we should suspend and what resources should be removed. So the guidance talks about things like soft furnishings, soft toys, anything that can't easily be cleaned. And then we have to think about everything else that is unique to your setting but is not clearly conveyed in the government documents. And As Michael said at the start, and I reiterate now, most of these questions are dictated by your unique circumstances. This is where you rely on your professionalism, what you know about your setting, what you know about what you need to do to stay viable, and also, again, putting the child first. Michael, if we can move on.
Because I'm in control of the button, I'm just going to butt in as well here, Mel. Before I move on, we've had a couple of questions in, which I'm going to ask people to bear with us until the end. It was mostly around group sizes and reporting to RIDOR. So hopefully I won't interrupt Melanie now through this process, but we will come back to those questions in due course. And for those people who are asking, the session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube site from tomorrow.
Yeah. Actually, Michael, I will take one very quickly in case I forget to say it at the end, that coronavirus, COVID-19, is now a notifiable disease. So I'm assuming when we're talking about reporting, the question is, do we still need to report that to Ofsted as a notifiable disease? And yes, the answer is you do.
That will lead on to a question that has just come in, and I know we're going to get sidetracked with this.
Of course.
What's the issue about telling other parents if there is a suspected child who is has symptoms? We were discussing this before we came on air. Would you like to deal with that now rather than trying to remember if we come back to it?
Yes, I'll try, but actually there is no specific guidance in the government guidance on this. So I think it's a judgment call, and I would say that if we make sure that parents are aware when their child comes back, this is how you will deal with any suspected cases of coronavirus, any children who are symptomatic. Sending a child home, isolating that child and sending them home whilst they're being tested is a precautionary measure. So it's a judgment call for you really whether you decide to tell parents at that point. Of course, if a child is confirmed as positive, then I think obviously you've got to tell parents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I can see we've moved on to the next slide. So again, some of the things that we need to consider. Who is coming back? You will have been thinking a lot of these things already, and you've probably got plans already. Who's coming back? Which staff coming back?
Melanie, can I ask you to get a bit closer to the microphone, please? It's coming across a bit crackly to me. Thank you.
I'm getting as close as I can now. Okay, does that sound better?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we need to know who's coming back. How many staff have you got? How many children need places? We anticipate that the demand for places will be lower in the early weeks, but obviously, again, that there's this judgment call, there's this juggling process that you have to do to meet the needs of your setting. I believe that you should allocate the key person. You're working these small groups, these cohorts, these bubbles, using a key person approach so that you allocate a key person to that group and that key person stays with that group consistently. Then you've got to think about which children are going into those key groups. And again, this is how you manage your setting. But we've heard from other providers who are talking about things like they would group children according to friendship groups as far as they could, according to the normal session times that those children would attend. And according to the individual needs of the children as well. And in some cases, don't forget, you may well be having mixed age groups, which again, you will have to think very carefully about how you differentiate activities for those groups. Then you need to think about how you're going to settle these children in or resettle these children, settling them back in. I believe you should work to your original existing procedures as far as possible, because best practice for settling in is a process, it is not an event, and yet we are faced with all the challenges of not being able to settle children back in over time, not being able to have those parents with them as you settle them as you normally would, but not making the assumption either that because a child attended before lockdown, that they will just come back and settle in as normal. That is very, very unlikely to be the case. So all these things need to be thought about and planned in advance. One way you can overcome this is with virtual home visits. We've all been making use of technology during lockdown, and I think this is the time when it's going to come into its own. So instead of doing the physical home visits that some of us already do, I think we could all now adapt a policy of doing virtual home visits so that you have the chance to reconnect with that child and that family, just as you do in those early days of getting to know each other. And there's certain activities and things that you can do with the child, maybe keeping those visits short initially, but actually building on them, but actually with what the parents want as well. And I've got a nice guide to virtual home visits. It's a new thing, so we've really had to think this. We've really had to think this through very carefully. Thinking about how we meet the needs of every child. Again, that idea that you can't just have a cohort come in and they will gradually settle. Thinking about the needs of every individual child in that cohort of children. And establishing their starting points again, because they've been away for 10 weeks. What we knew about them, our assessments that we've had, our summative assessments 10 weeks ago, have very little bearing on the starting points of that child when they return. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm sorry, I'm just taking questions. Yep, carry on.
I think, I don't know whether to be reassured or rather concerned. There's obviously an awful lot of questions coming in.
We'll be coming back to cohorts and numbers after you've done your bit, Melanie, rest assured.
Okay. Right, I thought that might be the case. So this is about gathering information as well before these children start back with you. So looking at your most recent summative assessment, looking at the learning journey entries, because that's a starting point for you. In some cases, you will not be that child's original key person. In fact, in very few cases, will you be every child in your group the original key person for that child. So we're really going to need to gather information about that child prior to lockdown. We devised a more about me form that can be sent to parents as well as you prepare them to come back to the setting. And this just asks about the child's experiences during lockdown. With all this information, you can build on them to help settle them in. Some of you will have maintained contact during lockdown. Others may not have been able to for various reasons. But again, we've got to build on any contact that we did have during lockdown. Discuss those individual children with their key person, their previous key person, if that was not you originally. I mentioned earlier conducting a home visit. And then, of course, trying to make contact again with those other agencies that may have been involved with the child. So, for example, any children that have social care involvement, you will need to know actually if they've had contact with the child during lockdown so that you can actually begin to assess and find out whether their situation has deteriorated or changed over that time. What we've also...
Just on that, in terms of the virtual home visit, am I correct in thinking it was one of the questions that came in from Emma? Is there a copy of the template for the home visit pack in the resource pack? Can you confirm?
There certainly is, yes. What I've done is put together a guidance and some of the key points, some bullet points for how you'd actually conduct that visit. So yes.
Thank you.
And we've also included in that pack a pre-start summative assessment. Now, this might sound really strange to be doing a pre-start summative assessment, but what that actually does is bring all that information that you have got together, and again, just helps you to get a general idea of where that child might be, that actually we can build on. Because again, this acknowledges that you cannot have those settling in sessions where you and the parents spend time together in the group with the child and have those incidental conversations that help you to build up a picture of that child. Okay, Michael.
There you go.
And well, there we go. A couple of examples there of the templates that I've included. The first one on the left-hand side, as you look at your screen, is in fact the more about me. I think there's probably 3 pages to that, so you've just got the first page there. And then on the right-hand side in front of you, you have the Pre-start summative assessment to help you to start to actually work out those starting points for children. And that basically looks at their characteristics of effective learning that the parents have told you about. They won't recognise them as the characteristics, but with the conversation that you have with parents and other people, you know, knowing the sorts of things that the child's enjoyed doing, the things that they've really taken on board during lockdown, and then it actually goes on to start to make a similar judgment about some of the prime areas. And I've settled on the prime areas for this, not the specific areas, because I think those are the things, the key things that we need to have in place before we welcome those children back, because that's where personal, social, emotional development comes in, and that, I think, is our key priority as we welcome the children back. Doesn't mean you ignore the specific areas if you've got that information, but let's stick with the prime areas for now. Okay, Michael. As I say at the top of the slide there, settling in still matters. So every child coming back to you deserves to be resettled thoroughly and at a time and a pace that meets their needs. And there's the challenge, isn't it? Because, you know, parents needing to get back to work, that's the reason why we're told we should try and open from the 1st of June. Parents needing to get back to work, but actually we also need to make sure that we are welcoming a child back and settling them in a way that doesn't lead to problems further down the line. 10 weeks is a significant period of time in any child's development, and we need to acknowledge that those children that we said goodbye to back in 10 weeks ago are not the same children that are returning to us. And we've mentioned that several times in the broadcasts that we've done recently. Those children need to re-establish an attachment with a key person, because as key person for that cohort of children, you are the secure base that's going to help them to adjust to a new normal. Things will be different when they go back, and there are so many emotional transactions to be negotiated as we go along the way. And when I'm talking about those emotional transactions, I'm talking about things like how that child separates from their main carer after such a prolonged period of lockdown, where children have had the undivided attention for most of the time of the parents. So there's lots of things like that we've got to consider. Because of the challenges, we've got to balance best practice against practicality, but this must not be done to the detriment of the child. So starting that settling in process well before the child returns, and that's where the virtual home visits are really, really going to make a difference. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Melanie.
Okay.
Has that moved on? I missed it. Yes.
It has, yes, we're fine. So as children come back to us, then we then need to think about how we refocus our observations. So I'm talking about those incidental observations in those first few days and weeks as children are back with us. But these are some of the things that you need to pay particular attention to. The mental health and well-being of the children as they come back to us. We don't know everything about what they've been to. You will have got some of that information, but just making sure that we've got that at the forefront of our minds, and that includes the parents as well. Focusing on those prime areas, particularly their personal, social and emotional development. Looking out for the children who may have lost ground in their learning and development, or perhaps have regressed in some areas. Children who are displaying separation anxiety, particularly as we try to juggle a settling in process that is not ideal. Looking out for any challenging behaviour as we would normally. Being aware of those children who are over anxious, who are worried about coronavirus. You know, it's a big word when you're a young child, and all we hear is the negativity that goes along with it. Some children will have suffered a loss or a separation from their main carer. We've seen so many stories about parents, particularly those working in NHS, who've actually isolated themselves from their family in order that they can keep on working. And then, of course, paying particular attention to our 2-year-olds, to our children with SEND, and those children who are vulnerable. And when I say that, I mean the children who maybe you were worried about before lockdown, but not quite worried enough to take further action. They might have been the ones that you were watching and just being aware of, making sure that their situation hasn't deteriorated. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And then we come on to planning to meet every child's needs. And when I thought about this, I was thinking it through, and I just happened to pick up my copy of the EYFS, which happened to fall open at the overarching principles. And when I looked at this, I thought, yes, this is what would steer my practice now. The fact that every child is a unique child, the positive relationships, enabling environments, children learning and developing in different ways and at different rates. All these things hold true now. So if we move on, Michael.
There you go.
Again, in the pack, I look at those in much more detail, each one of those. But again, for me, it starts with play as well. And I think that children need play now more than they ever have done before, because play helps them to make sense of their world. Children play within the environment they find themselves in. And then, as we know, people will say, I've heard parents saying that actually the children are getting on with it. It's the parents that are struggling. The process of play is more important than the resources we provide. So yes, we know there are things that we're not going to be able to do as we return. And we know there are activities that are going to be suspended. But actually what's more important is the child's opportunity to play in that enabling environment. Play is personally directed by the child, so we don't have to think about organising and planning activities for children. Of course, we will still have that balance of child-led activities and adult-led activities. But actually, if we're following the child's needs and we're watching how they're playing and we actually support that play process, those children are learning and developing, and we know enough about children's development to recognise the learning that happens through play. The impulse to play comes from within the child. You know, that's something that we mustn't suppress either. And that's the challenge with the idea of social distancing, which we know we can't achieve. That impulse to play is so strong, it's innate to children. We must not keep stopping it. We must think about enabling it. And of course, play is therapeutic, and children, it says at the bottom, learn through play. This is my play sandwich, Michael.
Okay, what's the bread?
The two statements in bold are the bread.
Oh, right, I see. Yes, I'm with you. Yes, I'm with you. Do you need me to move on?
I do indeed. Thank you. We've got to remember that we're all starting from scratch. So coming back to that, I'm looking for the trends in what children have enjoyed doing at home. Many children enjoyed creative activities. There's been a wealth of ideas available via online forums. We've seen celebrities actually offering all sorts of online activities for children, some to a greater and lesser success than others. But focus on activities that support the prime areas in those early days back as well. So storytelling, singing and rhymes, role playing. Practical idea here about giving children their own resource box with art equipment, scissors, glue, etc. Some people have decided to get each child a little pencil case of their own, and most children will be absolutely delighted to have that little resource pack that belongs to them and them alone. Plenty of outdoor play. We're being told more and more what we already knew in early years, that actually outdoor play and learning is brilliant. It's great. It's great for physical activity. It can meet all the areas of learning and development. And it's great from that health and safety and infection control perspective, that actually the virus is less likely to transmit in the outdoors. Use lots of stories to help children to make sense of their world. And of course, get your gardening gloves on. We know how many children and families have been gardening at home. I'm sure most of you have done similar things. So now's the time to get those children outside again. And even if you've only got a very, very small space to play in, just actually think about what you can grow outdoors. Don't ignore the specific areas, and as time goes on, use your observations to inform your curriculum design as you normally would. So again, we've still got to meet the requirements of the EYFS. We still have to use our best endeavours to deliver those learning and development requirements, acknowledging that that is going to be challenging, but where we can, we should try to do so. So these are just a few things, but keeping play at the heart of what we're doing and recognising the learning that's happening through that play, and then starting to think more about our curriculum design as we move on and thinking about what it is we want children to learn, because in essence, that's what our curriculum is. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And learning lessons as well from the home learning environment. I think in a sense, we've been part of this huge societal change. We all know that the home learning environment is important. We also know that it's important to engage parents in their children's learning. Well, the tables have been turned, haven't they? And parents now have been responsible for their children's learning and development for the past 10 weeks. They might not have been doing their observations. They might not have recognised characteristics of effective learning. They might not have recognised every opportunity they've had to teach their child, but that's what they've been doing for the past 10 weeks. And interestingly, teachers are reporting that a lot of younger siblings have been joining in with their online classes. And as well as upskilling some of the parents, they were impressed by the numbers of younger siblings joining in with online sessions. So the word out there from schools, and no pressure early years, they have great hopes for future cohorts. We also need to think about what we understand about the home learning environment, what we knew about it previously, and what we've learned about it in those recent weeks. What do we know now? How can we learn from that? And how can we continue the momentum of that home learning environment and supporting it as we are required to do in the EYFS? What are the lessons we can learn about parents as children's first and most enduring educators? And how can we build on the positives? Because there have been positives out there. Okay, Michael, if we move on again.
Okay.
Not wanting to end on the negative, but what we have to remember here is that not every child has had a good experience, and a huge proportion of eligible vulnerable children did not take up a childcare place during lockdown. I think the figure at one point was something like 5% of eligible vulnerable children had taken up a space, and so that really is worrying for us. So we may need to make contact with their support services as a priority. We need to know what's happened to those children. They haven't fallen down the gaps in the middle. We know that some children were on the threshold of needing support. So how have they fared during lockdown? And some of the children that we've had no previous concerns about may now be in need of support. And, you know, again, the figures very upsettingly are telling us that there's a huge increase in reports of domestic violence, domestic abuse in households. Some children have been in a home environment where their learning and development could not thrive, not because they were being neglected or abused, but simply because parents trying to juggle that work, home, childcare, you know, means that that child has been left to get on with it to a point. So these are the children that we must be alert to now. And yes, I've probably in the last couple of slides posed more questions than I have answers. So if we move on to the right slide now, the next slide, sorry, Michael.
Melanie, before we get on to the resources, can I just give you a pause for a glass of water there and just throw in a couple of questions? And whilst I try and find the ones about groups and 18 to 16, I've got to scroll back up through the questions. I'll just, if Lindsay Scott doesn't mind me taking her question and statement to look at the issue of resources and activities,
Yes.
I'll read this out, but she's speaking specifically about sand. But I think there's been other questions in terms of water, Play-Doh, etc. And this is Lindsay's question. We've been thinking long and hard about suspending sand. If we are letting the children garden, is it acceptable to use sand within a cohort outside? We have discussed using once per week, disinfecting it, or disposing of it after use. And I think encapsulated within that is the whole wider issue about what resources can we use.
Yes, and this is something I've been looking into, because you're not the first person to ask this question, Lindsay. I've always said, and I still maintain, and the guidance would actually back up this, that we should suspend any activities that we would normally suspend during an outbreak of infection. So things that we normally suspend, say if we had diarrhea and vomiting within the setting, would be sand, water play, Play-Doh, cooking activities, face painting, perhaps. So my suggestion would be that you look to suspend those activities or change completely the way that we offer them to children. I heard a lovely idea just the other day of somebody, a childminder actually, who said that she'd been out and bought loads of cat litter trays quite cheaply and was actually giving children their own sand trays to play in. So that's one idea. Of course, there's a cost implication for that. You ask about outdoor sand play, and there is no doubt that actually there is a chance that bacteria does stay on sand. If we're playing in the soil, there are a lot of benefits to playing with soil and dirt because there is good bacteria within it, whereas sand, which is clinically clean in the first place and is a hard surface, is quite likely to actually retain those bacteria. So we just need to be really careful about that. Water play is another one. Certainly you've got to suspend the water tray, traditional water tray activity where you'd have a small group of children together around the water tray, because obviously the proximity of those children is going to be an issue. So again, the idea may be of having a small tray. You've lost me. I'm back. Am I back?
No, you're back now. You're back now.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's that time of night again, isn't it, Michael, when the broadband tends to get busy? Okay, so water play then. Again, there is a small risk of transference of infection with water play because coronavirus is a respiratory disease. Respiratory diseases are obviously droplets. Water becomes another vehicle for those droplets to be transmitted, and even if they were highly sort of reduced, there is still a small risk. Some providers say they're using a lot of hose pipe play outdoors. Again, that's a judgment call for you because we have no specific guidance on that, but certainly the sand and water trays which would traditionally use it, I would urge you not to do so.
Okay, thank you. As I'm scrolling back up, I'm going to come back to you with the 18 and 16 group sizes, but it was an interesting question that Wendy very kindly reworded from earlier on, and it's about children becoming sick. If the child develops symptoms and subsequently tests positive while they're at home, is there a time limit on when they last attended that we will need to send their cohort home? E.g., if the child attends Monday to Wednesday and becomes ill on the Saturday and then tests positive. I mean, and there's another question as well in terms of there are lots of children who don't attend every day and so might be in the same bubble group or a different bubble group on different days. So your thoughts, Melanie, please.
My thoughts there are that we need to be very clear about what the incubation period is for coronavirus. So we know that in some cases people are infectious before any symptoms show. I think off the top of my head that the incubation period can be something like 2 weeks, hence we've got the isolation period of 2 weeks. So I think really that's a moot point. I think really if you've sent a child home, it's unlikely that they're going to come every other week. So no, I think you've got to tell everybody and you've got to take action accordingly.
Okay, and this does start leading us back up to the group questions. First of all, and I think this is something that I'd be interested in as well. Guidance is often talking about 16 children. Is that considered to be the absolute maximum in any one session?
It's recommended. So I think you have to think about the layout of your setting. And I would say that if you were a single room premises, so for example, if you operated in a community hall, where quite often you are in one large room, you would have to think about how you could divide those different cohorts off, how you could possibly manage dropping off and collection times, which is going to be, you know, the times when you are most vulnerable or the children are most vulnerable because of parents gathering together. So I think it really depends on the size and the layout of your setting. And if you have the rooms, the separate rooms, the resources to be able to manage larger groups, then, you know, it's something you can certainly consider. Bring it back to that risk assessment. What are the risks in doing that? How can you overcome them?
Okay, thank you. Right. Right, bear with me on this one.
Okay.
I will only have 12 in each day, divided into groups of 4, and we're all in one room. If we have a few cases, does that mean we would have to shut down? I don't think the guidance is that clear. And also, how do I contact the public health? And I think this is something that has come up a lot in terms of the guidance statement that says there'll be a rapid investigation. I understand from correspondence I've had, getting in touch with Public Health England has been challenging in some public health locally has been challenging, and that's understandable considering the circumstances.
Yeah. Okay, so there's several parts to that. The first one, how do you know who your Public Health England team are? And they're called different things in different areas, helpfully. But if you go online and put in Public Health England, you will be able to put in your postcode and it will tell you the contact details for your Public Health England or Health Protection Agency. And I think they're also called something else in some areas, I can't remember. But go Public Health England into the search engine and you will get the details of your local area to contact. So that's the first thing. And I would say you must have those details to hand. It's no use scratching around looking for them, you know, once you've got an outbreak in your setting. So have those ready. So, yes, go on, Michael, you were going to say something.
No. It was somebody again asking for, again, the numbers being banded around are 8s and 16s. Just a clarification on what is meant by these numbers would be helpful, just for people's understanding.
Yeah, and there has been actually quite a lot of discussion about this. That on the one hand, they say small groups of, you know, 8, and on the other hand, they say no more than 16 children. And I think what's come back from the department really is this is how you organise this and how you make those decisions on how many children that you can safely have back and keep those cohorts or bubbles then, if you like, within those small groups of 8 and manage to keep those separate from each other. So there is no clear answer to that because it really comes back to you, the layout of your setting and what you can manage.
Thank you. Oh, it's coming now. I'm a childminder. If I have 3 children, can I give them a water tray each at a safe distance apart in the garden, then flush the water down the drain after?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any reason why you can't do that because there's no risk of cross-infection if you're doing that. I said there are challenges around this really in terms of the resources that you've got available to you. But, you know, the weather's wonderful. Children love to play with water. You're outdoors, giving them separate water trays. They'd be absolutely delighted. Yes.
It's a helpful comment that's coming. It's back to the incubation question. The World Health Organization does say it could be 14 days for incubation. However, NHS Track and Trace says, we will ask you if you've had any close contact with anyone other than members of your household. We are interested in the 48 hours before you developed symptoms and the time since you developed symptoms. I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? That this is an emerging situation. Nobody is absolutely clear on what's there. And so again, how that influences your particular judgments in a setting can be challenging.
Well, what I would say there, Michael, is I think that 48-hour rule comes more about the logistics of actually tracking and tracing. You know, you wouldn't remember necessarily who you'd had contact with 2 weeks ago. So I think that 48 hours thing, and bearing in mind they're saying that they think this will only, is it 15% reduce instances by 15%? So it's a very small number, and it really is just one of the many elements that they're looking at. I think the 48-hour thing I would dismiss in terms of what we're talking about here. And I would say that we need to think about the general incubation period. And don't forget, those children will have been in contact with each other on a daily basis. It won't be a passing sort of contact with somebody.
And the other thing that has come up on a couple of comments, and most recently from Claire, is that that bubble or that cohort of children may be fine on one day, but it's different children on different days. And so that makes the whole notion of what is a group quite complicated.
But that's the thing about trying to get those children into cohorts, is that actually trying to be consistent, and that again comes to how you organise those bubbles. So you know where you're trying to match up how you organise it against normal sessions that those children would have, and that's why perhaps sometimes you could end up with those mixed age groups.
Yes, I'll take just one thing. We mentioned about this being a reportable disease and Ofsted. The question has come in, do RIDOR need to be notified as well?
RIDOR need to be reported of any accidents or incidents within the setting. That's caught me on the hop a little bit because I can't quite remember the word.
Pass it over.
Yeah, I can't remember if a notifiable disease has to be reported to RIDOR.
Let's do the wisdom of crowds here. If anybody can help, do RIDOR need to be notified of notifiable diseases? Please give us your views. I'll take it back to a nicer one in terms of back to the children. How can we help settle children coming in when they become upset when separating from mum, dad at the door? Parents are not going to be allowed to come inside, and we certainly don't want to physically drag them from mum. Is there the possibility of a settling area corner inside for extremely upset children? It's from Ava.
I think that comes down to the fact that obviously you still can't have the parent inside. And this is going to be, for me, one of the greatest challenges, I think, because we know that some children will cry when they leave the parent, and we've already got strategies in place that we use to actually, you know, to settle a child. But I think if a child continues to be upset for a prolonged period of time, then you need to phone the parents and get them to come back and collect the child, because with everything else that's going on, you know, that child might not just be the fact they're a bit upset because mum or dad's dropped them off. It might be more than that. So I just think you've really got to tune in to actually what's going on with that child. And then maybe the next day, you know, have a chat with the parent about how actually you can overcome this and what you're going to do. So put a plan into place for that child.
Just a couple of comments coming in on the RIDOR. Yes, RIDOR is just for accidents and incidents.
Yeah.
But as somebody has helpfully and rather concerningly said, if somebody dies in your setting,
yes.
then they clearly would have to be. So let's hope that does not occur.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I was thinking, but I just could not remember the wording of the RIDOR requirements. So thank you for that.
Wendy has given us the actual quote, which thank you very much, Wendy, but I hope you don't mind if I don't read it all out, but that's the essence of it. Thank you very much. Melanie, shall we move on to the welcome back resources, back to the slides?
Yes, please.
I'm conscious you're taking a bit of a battering here, so I think you're holding up really well. Thank you.
No, that's fine. My voice is starting to go, but I'm sure by the time we've finished and my husband comes home from work, he'll be quite pleased about that. Okay, so we have, as most of you are aware now, we've been working really hard to make sure that you've got the resources and the support that you need to help you welcome children back. We put together 3 packs. All of them are available in our shop. They're all free to you as members, and you can get them as one bundle. we've done them in order of actually the sequence of events that are happening. So we've talked about the first one about mental health and well-being of children and families and your own staff and yourself. We talked last time about how you prepare your premises and the early years environment, which is pack 2 in the sequence. And then the pack that's available as of today is meeting the needs of children from day 1. So a lot of the things that I have really skirted over as we've gone through today's presentation, you will actually find the answers in those packs. And then for any childminders that are here today as well, an additional pack incorporating those 3 is now available for you as well. Future webinars, we'll keep going with the webinars as long as you need them. And, you know, as you flag up to us the topics that you need and that we can interpret you need from the questions that are coming in. We've got Educare online training modules, which are free again to you as members. And we have a particular pack, don't we, as well, Michael, for coronavirus, basically, for the situation at the moment, which is
it's a series of online training modules which was designed primarily in terms of the lockdown issues. So they cover about anxiety issues, how to spot neglect, online safety, etc. And those are available free via the Early Years Alliance website until the end of June, I think it is.
Yeah. We also have something called Smart PD as well, and we've got the details of how you actually access Smart PD in all of the welcome backpacks, where you'll be asked to fill in a very short questionnaire, and that will go to our colleagues who will actually look at the resources that we can offer you, maybe training, maybe some paid for resources, some free resources and guidance, and also am I allowed to say consultancy as well, Michael?
You are allowed to say consultancy, Melanie.
I'm glad, because now I've said it. That actually we can offer specific consultancy to individual settings as well, and that would be done via Zoom, via Skype, or whatever suits at this moment. But that would be time to talk to one of our early years experts about some of the specific issues that you're facing, and that would be very much around practice and you know, possibly things like behaviour management, inclusion, and so on.
Thank you. I do have to make an apology to Wendy, actually, because I didn't read correctly her reference to the RIDDOR issue, and I think this is important in terms of the planning that we need to put in place on here, because what she's quite rightly recognised is that actually RIDDOR, when an unintended incident at work has led to someone's possible or actual exposure to coronavirus, this must be reported as a dangerous occurrence. A work has been diagnosed and there is reasonable evidence that it was caused by exposure at work. This must be recorded as a case of disease, etc. Now, I think that's interesting in terms of what we're trying to do here in terms of that consideration about the professional judgment you have to make about the safety of the children and staff in your provision. Whilst it would obviously be very difficult to identify that actually cause and effect meant that that individual became infected in your setting, I think it does highlight the importance here of us as employers to create a safe environment for everybody, that actually the mitigation, good hygiene and effective practice as far as is possible is a requirement both from an employment point of view as well as for the best interests of children.
And what that actually comes down to as well is because RIDDOR, as was mentioned earlier, investigate accidents, and definition of an accident is something that's unforeseen, unplanned and unavoidable, whereas RIDDOR would actually investigate and decide if it was an incident rather than an actual accident. And I think that's an important differentiation to make, because if you haven't put in those appropriate safety measures and you've been negligent, then obviously that's what RIDDOR would be looking at.
Okay, right, I'm conscious that we've thrown everything at you, Melanie, in the last 3/4 of an hour and nearly an hour. I will just keep scrolling down. There are a few other questions in terms of, again, accessing the pack. There are those, the packs are free if you are members, they are purchasable if you're not members, but the Educare programs about wellbeing in lockdown are free to anybody at all. some very kind words that these webinars are really reassuring, and thank you so much for your help, Melanie. So I think that's taking from there. Even people saying they've logged in during their half-term holidays. So
wow, that's nice to know, isn't it? Actually, Michael, if you go on to the very last slide, I can just talk people through that whilst you have a final look at your questions, if that's all right. So you can see at the bottom of the screen there, we've got the nice pack covers there for you, which just cover the things that I've said earlier. Free of charge, as Michael said, to members. And don't forget, locally in your area, there's a good chance that we will be hosting an online Connect event. And these are our colleagues who actually work closely and directly with our members. We can't go do the normal meetings that we'll be hosting all over the country at this time of year. So we're running a series of Connect events online, and they have been so helpful for people. These bring practitioners together, and you can talk to each other as well and share good practice. I've tapped into a few of them, and they are absolutely brilliant. I think I've learned as much from those as hopefully people have learned from us. So do look out for Connect events in your area, and obviously with them being online, they don't need to be in your area either. And then, as Michael said earlier, we update the Alliance website daily. We're right on top of all the current government guidance that's coming through. We've got mini guides there and press updates for you. And we've also got FAQs on the website as well. So any questions that actually we haven't answered today, there's a good chance you'll find an answer on the website. Okay, Michael?
Oh, sorry, I'm just answering a question privately.
That caught you out.
Sorry, yes, you have. Yeah, sorry, you were supposed to talk for a few seconds longer. Right, thank you, everybody. I hope you found that as helpful and illuminating and interesting as I have. It just goes to say thank you once again to Melanie for her hard work in putting together both the packs and also these resources. And again, thank you to everybody who's taken part and engaged with us, because these are very much supported by the comments that come back from you, and we help develop our guidance in response to the questions that come through. As I said at the beginning, we will upload the recording of this webinar to our YouTube page, hopefully from about lunchtime on Friday. For you, so if there's anything you missed or your broadband ducked out, then you have the pleasure of listening to us again. Also, anybody who has registered will receive copies of the slides. That will also have the hyperlinks to take you to the various places on guidance. So it just remains for me to say thank you to Melanie and to everybody who took part, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So keep following our social media channels to where you'll find registration. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Goodbye, Melanie.
Goodbye.